So in order to prepare for this conversation, I looked at my bookshelf because that's where it all starts. And when I first looked at my bookshelf, I found this one, which is Best Australian Essays, edited by me, 2012. But that's not why I'm telling you that. I'm telling you that because I had edited, in that, I had put an essay by a writer I'd never heard of called Lee Kofman. And I seem to think it was unpublished because I remember it being a manuscript. Later, I think it was published in the Griffith Review. But when I read it, I didn't know this person at all. But when you look at published essays, and then a whole lot of people send you essays, and you look at that pile too, because there could be a gem in there. And I found this gem, this really unusual voice, an unusual topic, and complex. And I thought that's pretty good. So I selected it for this Best Australian Essays. Then I found this one, The Dangerous Bride. This is actually a copy from the library because someone borrowed my copy and hasn't given it back. But then I remember, so The Dangerous Bride was there too. Then there was a collection of essays that she edited. Where are they? Oh, no, I forgot to bring Split, didn't I?
It's on the table.
Anyway, she selected one of my essays so that's another connection. And then there's this book called Imperfect, and I was sent to it in manuscript form, and I endorsed it because I thought it was very important and unusual. And so these 4 books and the one that I haven't brought with me have been the connection between Lee and I over quite a long time. Now, our area of engagement now includes the school rounds of Sholem Aleichem College, where Lee and I see each other as she rushes to pick up her children. She's always late. I'm always early because I've been picking up grandchildren from Sholem for about 1 million years. And we see each other as I'm leaving and she's running because she's very busy, and she always makes it. The children aren't suffering, but they just...
I'm not sure about that.
No. But I'm always there early, and my grandchildren think that's hysterical. But we're also here because we're in this group of Jewish Australian creatives, writers, academics, artists, which Lee started after October the 7th. And we were recently doxxed by anti-Semitic actors here in Australia. We've got one of our other group members here, Deborah Conway.
And Michael Gowenda.
And Michael Gowenda, of course.
And Lee.
Oh, Julie, hello. Welcome.
Julie, Julie.
Of course, Julie. Thank you,
and
Julie.
Mirav as well.
And Mirav.
Yes.
Everybody. And up the back. And Frady.
Oh, my goodness.
And hi. Yeah.
This is a very special event.
It is a special event. So Lee has the distinction of being, I think, the only Australian Israeli writer with a recognised big public profile working in Australia today. And since October the 7th, as I've said, she's been a leader in supporting our Australian Jewish community of writers. So she also describes herself as a social worker by training and a tragedy junkie by vocation at some point. So we're going to find out what's making this woman tick. So when I interviewed the great Irish writer Edna O'Brien, she said that to be a writer, it helps to come from somewhere, which means, a place you're born, a family, a birthplace, somewhere with big history. And Lee, I think you lucked out with your big history, where you come from. So I need to know where you were born, the times and the family. Tell me about Lee Kofman. What happened?
Sure.
Yeah,
Can you hear me?
No, that's where you've got a microphone.
Okay.
What is this? Can you hear me business?
Can I just say before I answer you...
Is it on?
Sorry. Is that on?
That's better. Okay.
So can I just say before I answer that lovely question that Ramona was inaccurate today about one thing, because you know how she talked about my essay which she picked out of the unsolicited pile, and she said, and I never heard about this writer. But Ramona, we met in 2008.
No. I did interview you.
In February 2008, 2 days before I left my second marriage.
Ah, so you remember it. And is that because we talked about being at a writer's retreat?
Absolutely. And so I was summoned to be interviewed by Ramona.
Summoned?
Yes.
Summoned?
By Peter Bishop. Yeah. Through Peter Bishop, he volunteered me, I think, too. So I have been involved in this very famous sort of iconic writer's retreat in Australia called Varuna Writer's House in Blue Mountains. And the director of that retreat at the time said to me, look, you have to go and talk to Ramona Koval on her show, but be very careful. She's dangerous.
Really? What?
She will ask you very difficult questions. So I was already very nervous because I was about to leave my husband. But I survived, and Ramona was wonderful, and I became a huge fan of her. And actually, way before that essay that Ramona picked, I was collecting Ramona's books. I own all your books, including your cooking book.
Really?
The only one I don't have is your first novel, because
I've got so many copies under my bed of my first novel. I'll give it to you.
But where I came from, yeah?
Okay, let's talk about where were you born?
So I've got a very sort of strange biography, because I can't ever sort of answer this question properly. All I can say, probably I was born in Soviet Union, because...
No, you must be born in a place, right? Your mother gave birth to you where?
So my mother gave birth to me in Siberia, in a very little town that became famous only in recent years because there was a big explosion there. It's a mining town. Kemerovo. So, but there were quite a few Jews there, because during the the Doctor Affair in Stalinist days, when a lot of Russian intellectuals were exiled, my grandparents, my mother's parents, who were both professors of chemistry, lost all their jobs. So the only place they could find to work in was a little mining town, Kemerovo, in Siberia. But the reason I'm saying I can never sort of answer this question in a straightforward manner is because my father is actually from Ukraine, and there's a story there too why they met, and that's because Siberia. So my mom is a Siberian Jew, and my father is a Ukrainian Jew from Odessa. But at the time when I was born in the Soviet Union, as many of you may know, there were quotas for Jews at universities. So you couldn't go to a large university, unless there was very sort of limited numbers. So my father, who has been a bit of a genius, he's a physicist. I can never understand what he does, but he's a theoretical physicist. that says it all. So he, despite all his brilliance, he couldn't get into Moscow University where he wanted to go, and so he ended up in Siberia, in the same university with my mother. And then when I was about 6, we moved from Siberia to... and in Siberia, I have to tell you all these things because it kind of really relates to things I write about. And at the time when my parents got together, basically from the perspective of the university, they committed a big crime because talented people, my mother was doing her master's in English, my father was doing his PhD in physics. Talented people were not supposed to have private lives. They were not supposed to get married and commit the sin of getting pregnant. And so my parents actually found themselves completely homeless in Siberia because they used to live on the premises of the university, Akademgorodok, which was like nowhere among all these sort of villages there with peasants and illiterate peasants. So they basically found themselves homeless. They were told to leave the university because they were married and they had a baby on the way. And so I spent my first 6 years basically living sometimes with my grandparents when my parents didn't have where to live, sometimes in different little villages where we didn't have even a toilet inside the house. So one of my biggest childhood memories from Siberia is seeing my father drowning mice in the toilet, in the outdoor toilet, because we had lots of mice there. And another memory I have is having our landlord chasing with the ex after his wife and he got drunk. So But then when I was 6, my parents sort of had enough of wandering in Siberia, and they went to live with my father's mother in Odessa. And that apartment did have a toilet inside. It was a toilet that my uncle built, and the only place he managed to build it was in the kitchen next to the dining table. So that's basically my life. That's where I come from. And then we came to Israel when I was 12, and they had a proper toilet. I was very happy.
Okay, all right. Thank you for the toilet history. And
I wrote a lot about it, actually.
I know. But what I think we've missed a bit, which is an important bit. So you are a sickly child, and not only were you sick and you had operations when you were a baby, but then you were also a child that had a big car accident, or a bus accident. So tell me a little bit about your relationship with your body, because that also is very important in the sort of writing you do.
Thank you, sure. So I've got lots and lots of scars on my body. I got almost all of them by the age of 12 in what I call my misfortunes. So my very first novel, my childhood misfortunes, which were very good for me as a writer, of course. Now I know that. But I have suffered on the account a lot. So when I was 20, I wrote my first novel. It was a very bad novel. Even my publisher said so. He said it was like a diary. But his first reaction, my first publisher ever reaction, when he read that book, which was basically like just really my autobiography, it was very bad. He said, "What happened to you? What happened to your character as a child? Is just too contrived. It couldn't have happened, but it did." So I did. I spent my first 11 years or so mostly in hospitals, in and out, because not only I was born with a heart condition, the kind of condition that actually in the West would have been fixed quite easily, but in Russia, in the Soviet Union, they were very backwards with medicine. So it was unclear whether I'll actually live or die until I was about 8 years old. So when I was 8 years old, I had the operation. My parents had to bribe the surgeon who was supposed to operate on me not to operate on me, because his nickname was the Butcher. And the nickname he got was because a lot of the patients actually died under his knife, but nobody would fire him because his brother was a big person in the party, the Communist Party. So I survived that operation. I got a different surgeon. Everything was fine. I was recovering really well. And then when I was 10, my mother asked me to get some sugar for an apple pie she was baking. She was very heavily pregnant with my second brother, so she couldn't be bothered to go out. I went out to buy the sugar, and a bus knocked me down. So I must say, I crossed in the green light, but there were witnesses. But like it often happens used to happen, I don't know what Russia is like now, but like it often used to happen in the Soviet Union, the bus driver was drunk. So that's it. And then I went for another sort of series of long hospitalizations.
So it must have been good for your reading life, being in hospital.
It was very good for my reading life. Really the main way for me to get through those hospital stays, but really in the Soviet Union they were pretty gruesome. Both from, the pain management wasn't great, a lot of things were not great, but also it was compounded by something that probably will speak to us today very much, by quite heavy anti-Semitism. Also from kids. I coped a lot from kids.
Like
when
what?
Well, for example, the most striking, it keeps making these noises. Would you like me to talk like this or steal the mic? Okay. So
just if you hold it under your chin, you won't be popping so much.
Like this,
yes.
Great, thank you. See, I have the really, the pro speaker here.
It's all right.
Thank you. One of my strongest memories, for example, was that just the night after I came from the ICU after having had the heart surgery finally. I came back to my room. When I say my room, in those days in Moscow hospital where I was, we had about, it was like a dormitory. We had about, the kids on a cardiac ward were all very sick. a lot of them died. I saw a lot of kids dying around me, but we were like in this really big dormitory rooms. There were 12, 15 kids sometimes. So I remember coming back from the surgery to the dormitory, and the kids basically decided I was in a lot of pain, very disoriented, and the kids decided to keep me awake all night because I was a Jew. So they sang me all these sort of songs, not very nice songs, and kept me awake in all sorts of unpleasant ways. It was difficult at the time, really great for my writing career. One of the stories, this was actually one of the first stories I kind of managed to publish in Australia when I started writing in English.
So what were you reading as a child?
Oh goodness, I was such a weird child. I read Tolstoy for the first time, War and Peace, when I was 8. I mean, it's ridiculous. I've got an 8-year-old at home now. You know, he loves reading. He reads David Baddiel, you know, his children's books. He reads, Diary of a Wimpy Kid. I read War and Peace. I did skip most of the war parts. I mostly focused on the romantic story. But I read really widely. I read whatever we had at home. And even by Soviet standards, in Soviet Union, books were very cheap. And everybody had lots and lots of books at home. Even truck drivers were very well versed in classics. But in our home, it was probably even more. Like we had, so whatever we had at home, just read collected works of Chekhov, collected works of Maupassant, Guy de Maupassant, I love the French writers, Victor Hugo, all Alexandre Dumas, the Three Musketeers, everything. And sometimes I think maybe those classics were a little bit wasted on me as a child because it took me a very long time to want to revisit them because I read them so many times. But as a child, you know, you don't understand them as well. Like at the moment I'm reading again Crime and Punishment by Dostoevsky. And of course I'm understanding it so much differently now.
And your mum, she's studying English. So who was she reading?
She was reading, oh my God, what can I say? My parents are deeply religious.
Well, yeah, I was going to get to that in a moment. But
And I said, and so she went through a really big metamorphosis of, reading Shakespeare, to then sort of immersing yourself mostly in holy books. My parents spoke quite good Hebrew already when we actually arrived in Israel.
Well, hang on. Let's go, pull back. So they're both, he's a physicist, she's an academic, and they decide that, when did they turn Orthodox? When did they discover their Jewish roots?
Actually, really early. For me, it was my fault because I was sick when they became religious, and that was because they grew so disillusioned with the healthcare system in Russia. Having had such a sickly child as myself. And they also grew just generally. I mean, my parents, they're people of ideals. They're people who were always committed, always wanted to believe in something. First they believed in communism, and then they went through this whole sort of disillusionment phase. And then they became religious because they needed something, the next sort of stage. And I know there are religious people in the room, and I respect religion. I'm myself not religious, but for me as a child, it was difficult because I never managed to believe in God, and I was pretty much forced to during my childhood. And so I now very grateful that my parents are religious because they get so much out of it, and I can see how happy it makes them. But for me as a child, I always kind of grew up mourning the loss of the kind of parents that I had, because you can also be religious and you can be religious. There are different ways. And my parents, as many people who Chozrim B'Tshuva, who become later in life religious, they sort of went for this full force in some ways.
So how was your home? I mean, how could they eat kosher food, for example?
Well, I remember chickens running in our kitchen in Odessa, and so they would buy these chickens. We didn't have much money to eat meat generally in Soviet Union, because once my parents became religious and applied to live to Israel, they were refused. They became refuseniks, and you know what happens to refuseniks? They my mother lost her job. My father was kept in his job because he's too good scientist to lose, but his salary was almost halved. And so we didn't have much money to eat meat. But occasionally, we would have this chicken that my grandma would bring from the market, and they would be running around headless because we would have this rabbi come and the rabbi of Odessa, slaughtering them there. So that was was quite difficult. But it took them a long time to understand what being kosher means, like they were mentored by other, because in the Soviet Union, as some of you may know, one of the mantras was Karl Marx said that religion is an opium for the masses. So it was really like, my parents had absolutely no idea how to be religious, and so it took them a long time to understand, for example, that salami made of pork is better not to eat. So they would do the Shabbat, but they would have the salami.
So your mum...
That was before the chickens.
Yeah. So she lost her job, and you say because they were refuseniks, she had to get a job as a cleaning.
So my mother had so many degrees, more than probably a person needs. She used to clean parks. So I have this other sort of strong memory of going with her to the park. My mother would put this headscarf, because it would be hot, and she would be sort of walking around cleaning, and I'll be pottering around her, usually with my bandaged leg or some other bandages on me. There was always some bandages on me until I was about 11 or 12.
And they used to get visits from people outside?
Yes.
This was sort of under the nose of the Soviet authorities too.
Yes, absolutely. So it was in the Soviet Union, as some of you may know, it was actually prohibited to associate with foreigners, so-called foreigners. So we would have, because my parents, they basically headed the religious underground of Jews in Odessa. So our house became like a center of, like the heart of the underground. And so quite a lot of Jewish and even non-Jewish people from America especially, but also from Europe, would arrive to visit. And one of the purposes for their visit would be to come to our parents and to smuggle to them things like Hebrew textbooks, because my parents ran a Hebrew classes, clandestine Hebrew classes at their home. Bible, all these holy books, they would bring them also jeans to sell in the black market because they had no money. They would bring us all sorts of things like this. And another sort of strong childhood memory I have, which I wrote about as well, is one day a KGB came to search our house. And they didn't have any they had to have some kind of warrant. So their warrant officially was they were searching for diamonds, for stolen diamonds. Now, my parents lived in a neighborhood. I don't know what the equivalent would be. Definitely there were no diamonds there, for sure. I don't think there was silver even in the neighborhood where we lived. We had open gutters everywhere, Anyway, but so they came to look for diamonds. And my parents took me aside and said, Lubachka, I think I was about 10 then, said, Lubachka, I had some old pram, like the old pram. Lubachka, take this book. So they put all these, banned books, hid them in my pram, and I said, go for a walk in the pram and the doll. And so the KGB people, the officers who came to us, they kind of, I think, didn't consider that at 10, usually girls don't quite walk at 6 o'clock in the morning with prams outside. But anyway, I managed to hide the book. So that's sort of my one heroic thing I did nothing else in my life, but that was one thing.
Well, your mother, who was, I believe, like you were the oldest child, and then they had 3 sons after that. And she was pregnant with one of them, and what did she threatened if they didn't let them out? What did she do?
So that's how we got finally after 6 years of being refused, how we got our permit to live, because first of all, I just want to say that my parents didn't want to have any children until they will be sure that I will live. So they only started producing more children when I was 8.5, and I survived the surgery, and I just went for it. So by the time this incident that Ramona mentioned happened, I already had 2 little brothers and another one on the way. So my parents were so fed up with waiting and living the way we lived. So my mother just went to Ovir, which is the local office for foreign affairs, And she said, if you're not going to let us go, I'm going to burn myself in the Red Square, pregnant, and all the West will know about it. And just shortly after we got visas. And we actually, it was 1985, nobody actually was living at that time. So it was still Soviet Union, still communism. I remember there were 11 people on the plane when we were leaving, and 5 out of these 11 people were our family. And to this day, as much as I'm happy that we left, as much as I'm grateful that I didn't end up, growing up in what Russia is today, I can tell you I don't have much love for Putin anyway. But as much as grateful, a part of me, and I write about this quite a bit as well, a part of me always feels like I missed something extraordinarily important, because I just wanted so much to be there during the time of the period glasnost and perestroika, because in my time, the censorship, the repression was so pervasive that if I saw with my eyes when I was, it all started when I was 13. We left about, I think maybe about 8 months before changes started to happen. If I was there at the time, it would be such a miracle. It would be just such a life-changing experience, I think.
But you had other miracles, You came to Israel, but you landed in Ashdod. Eventually.
I never say, so never straightforward with my family and with myself as well. We always sort of been moving and moving and moving. So that was our third destination there, yeah.
But tell me about you arrived in Israel. Did you speak Ivrit at all?
No, nothing, not at all. So I actually asked my parents, I actually rebelled and I refused to go to school because I didn't speak the language, and I insisted to go to Ulpan. You probably all know what Ulpan is. And at the time, I don't know what it's like now, but at my time, Ulpan was only for adults. So I was the only child, 12 years old, going to Ulpan for a year, and only after a year I agreed to go back to school.
So how was it for you, learning a new language?
It's hard for me to remember now, but I think I probably loved it. I also really loved learning English. I really immersed myself in it, but I don't have any strong memories. The only memories I do have is of being extraordinarily shy and self-conscious about my accent. And to the very end of my stay in Israel, I love Israel very much, but not uncritically. And one of the things that I suppose, I wouldn't say I have a bone to pick with Israel, especially not at this time that Israel is facing now, but just something that always stayed with me is how, I think it's probably different now in Israel because there's so many people from Russia, but at my time, because we arrived so early, there were hardly any Russian migrants, and I was quite taunted because of that. And to this day, I remember how I would really, really watch my consonants, especially the R, because my R would roll in a Russian way. And I would often pretend to people, because I didn't want to be stigmatized, I would often pretend and say, I came to Israel when I was a baby, even though I was 12. But sometimes my R will accidentally roll, and people say, so you're Russia, you're Russian. And then it will be like, you're kind of a bit beneath us. I don't think it's like this now with all the Russian migration, but in my time it was quite, yeah.
So only a few years later, you start writing in Hebrew, and you start publishing in Hebrew, first as a young journalist and then as a writer. So it's just audacious. Can you imagine if you went somewhere else and learned a whole new language at 12, and then a few years later, 17 or 18, you were publishing in a newspaper? It's pretty damn fantastic, don't you think, now?
Oh, thank you. Yeah, I think I was about 16 when I started.
And what were you writing about?
I was just doing, I was writing both for the national, youth magazine, Mariv Lenore, and I was also writing for a local Ashdod newspaper, just whatever. I think my breakthrough was actually a really interesting article. It has nothing to do with my own talents as a journalist. I had a really good subject because I found in Ashdod, where I lived, a Jewish migrant from China, which is quite unusual. And she looked completely, she had all the Asian features. She was very, very beautiful. She was a model. And so it was a big story what I did, so anything really, but came my way.
And you moved to Tel Aviv.
And some short fiction as well.
Yeah, and you moved to Tel Aviv, and your big romance with this city began.
Yes. I moved to Tel Aviv really early. I moved at 19 while I was still a soldier, and that's very, again, unusual to do when you're in Israel, because as some of you, I know there are Israelis in the audience, and Israelis know that when you are doing your compulsory army service, you get paid something like an equivalent would be, I don't know, $50 a month, something Australian equivalent. So it was very hard to afford rent, but because I struggled to live at home, because my parents, they were very religious and I was not religious, and I didn't want to live in Ashdod, where I grew up in Israel. Again, it's different today, but in my days, Ashdod was mostly famous with its football players and beauty queens. So, the education was not quite up the standard. I remember one of my teachers in Ashdod at school, history teacher, had real trouble to differentiating between the First and the Second War. So it was that sort of schooling. And I really wanted to get out.
Leah, I grew up in Ashdod.
We should talk about it. Which suburb did you live in? See, that's the nice one.
That's the nice part of Ashdod.
I lived in out of all the suburbs, I lived in the worst one on the border of Ashkelon, Zorvav, So I had most of my neighbors were either drug dealers or call girls or, that sort of stuff, which was great. Again, as a writer, it was fantastic. I'm still friends with some of my former neighbors.
So you were writing, you were being published, and you decided to be a social worker.
Oh, no, that was a very bad advice I took from my parents.
Your parents wanted you to be a social worker. They didn't want you to write about the drug dealers and the parties.
Definitely not.
So you listened to them.
Yes, and sometimes I do. I always cringe, but I often listen to my mother because, very unfortunately, my mother is often right.
So what sort of a social worker did you want to be?
I really just did it for security. All my life, and a lot of my writing is about this paradox I have in me. So I have this really conflicting desires between wanting adventures and also wanting to be wild and live wild life. And sometimes I manage, but I also always wanted security very strongly. So these conflicted forces, I think they sort of really behind most of my life choices. And going to study social work, listening to my parents, to my mother especially, was really part of that sort of wish for security. I just wanted to have an income.
But you wanted to have an income, but you were working with people who were desperate.
I was.
They were the drug addicts and the kids who were wandering the streets and.
I did a bit of that. So I haven't actually finished my social work degree in Israel. I finished it in Australia. But yeah. I did do some social work practice, and I worked with in Jaffa especially. So all of you maybe know, Jaffa is a very multicultural area of Tel Aviv. It's where Jews and Arabs live together, sometimes peacefully, sometimes not so peacefully. And so I did quite a bit of work there as a student. And then when I came here, I worked in mental health for a couple of years. And I really loved it because I worked in this really special organization that sadly doesn't exist anymore, called Second Story. And in that organization, it was a very quirky organization. Almost all the staff there were some kind of practicing artists like myself. So we had singers and fashion designers and I know there's somebody in the audience who know very well this organization. I won't look. But so it was a great organization. And so we did, Gila would know exactly. So you know what it was like.
She was amazing. She used to be my social worker.
But it's okay.
Thank you
can
so
tell
much.
us later.
But thank you. But it was very quirky. It was very different. We actually did a lot of group work, and we practiced our passions with working with people with mental health.
So what made you come to Australia? Hang on, I've got to find out. Your parents then went to New York.
Yeah.
So they left Israel when?
So my parents left Israel just a year after I left to Australia. When I went to Australia, I didn't actually mean to stay here. I mean to I meant to go and do my big trip to Europe. That's what I wanted.
And you started in Australia too? You did a big trip to Europe?
Because I had no money. And I have relatives in Sydney, so my plan was I'll go and stay with my relatives, do some cash in hand, work, save more money, and then go and do what I really wanted, which is to see where Hemingway used to write in cafes in Paris, to go to London, to see where, where I love Sherlock Holmes books. I want to see a Sherlock Holmes museum. Oh, I wanted to do a real literary pilgrimage in Europe, which was the kind of books I grew up on. Although I didn't read just European books, but anyway. But I needed money, so very prosaically, I came to Australia, just thinking I'll just be here for a few months, and then I got married here, and got divorced, and got married, and got divorced, and got married, and I stayed, and I've had a really great love affair with Australia, which in recent years became more and more difficult. And now I don't know anymore what I think about Australia since October 7. I think most of us don't know.
Well, we're going to come to that in a second. But your parents they left the Holy Land and they went to New York.
They did, because my father, I know this is being recorded today, so I don't want to speak for my parents why they left. But all I'll say is that they got a green card because of my father's scientific achievements. And it's interesting because before I left, my parents were filling out all this paperwork to go to America, and they really wanted me to come with them, of course, and fill paperwork for me as well. And I refused, and I said to them, no, I can't see myself living anywhere but in Israel. And then I left before them, and I fell in love with Australia, and I stayed here.
Okay, so now you learn English. So, the next language. And did you have ambitions to be a writer in English?
Yes, yeah, it was really, so when I came to Australia, I was in the middle of writing my third book. So my first 3 books, they're in Hebrew. It's 2 novels and a collection of short stories. So I was writing my third book, second novel here. And I managed to write it in Hebrew here. And actually, I don't know if anybody here involved in Hamerkaz synagogue. Yes. So the rabbi there is amazing, Moti. He was just so kind to me. I was a tourist at the time. He didn't have to help me. He actually gave me his computer and let me print my whole book, which is, a lot of pages. And he's the kindest man. Because of him, I could send my book to publishers at the time. And then the book came out. That was early 2000, before the social media, And I went to launch it in Israel. And there is a point to the story. So I went to launch it in Israel. And it was very hard to take time off work. And again, the money thing and all this. But anyway, I managed to buy a ticket, went to Israel to launch the book. And my publisher met me just when I arrived and said, look, unfortunately, the truck with your books were just stolen. So there's no launch. So the whole print is gone. I don't think the people who stole the books wanted the books. Somebody is still using it as toilet paper somewhere. They want the truck. But the truck was stolen. So basically I made all that trip, expensive, long trip, to not even have the book launch. So the reason I'm telling this story is because when I came back to Australia, it just occurred to me that because I'm a literary writer, which means I don't sell many books, I don't do it for money. I do it really for, one of the things is to interact with audiences. And it was clear to me that I can't sustain life as a writer in Australia if I'll keep writing in Hebrew. So what I did then, I literally, and I a bit regret it actually today, but I literally discarded my other 2 languages. And for 10 years, I stopped reading and writing in Russian and Hebrew. And I completely dedicated myself to English. To learn English well enough to be able to write, I bought any dictionary that I could just lay my hands on, idioms, fable and phrases, all sorts of things. And I just would sit and patiently with really thick books and word after word, which I didn't know, I would underline, find it in the dictionary, write the meaning. It was really painstaking. But it kind of paid off eventually.
I think so. I think kind of paid off eventually.
But I still don't feel confident in English. So what happened to me now? It's not. I actually don't have even one language in which I'm confident. I feel.
Okay,
I
well,
often say I don't speak
let's
three
talk about that.
languages.
The outsider as a writer, outside her own languages as well. Tell me about how important it is to be an outsider for you.
Yeah, look, I actually don't know what it's like to be an insider. I've never been because I've never written in my mother tongue, in Russian. And when I was writing my books in Hebrew, you know, I was pretty fresh there. And I wasn't embedded in the Israeli culture the way, you know, my contemporaries were. And it's the same here. And I think because I always feel like I don't belong, I always feel very, very tentative, I doubt a lot. And maybe it's a good thing in some way because I think doubt is one of the best things that the writer can have. There's nothing worse than reading books by people who want to send messages to their readers, want to impart their knowledge and lessons. Those books usually don't work well. I'm talking now from a perspective of a teacher, because I'm a teacher of writing. I'm a mentor and writing teacher. That's what I do for a living these days. I've never seen a good book happening when the writer had something fixed in mind. And I know you, Ramona, when you write, I know you process, you always start something because you want to find out things rather than you have a fixed opinion you want to put on paper. So I think being an outsider helps in that way, but it's also difficult. And it's also, in terms of publishing, it's difficult because I can't offer Australian audiences this quintessential Australian experience of, you know, even though it's interesting because in Australia I notice almost all the fiction set in small towns in the country, but who lives there? Nobody. Most of the writers who write on the don't. So I don't know what's that about.
But obviously you've been a watchful child and a watchful outsider, and which is important for a writer. You have to be a noticer. You have to be an interpreter of body language, even if you can't interpret language.
That's so true. That's so true. But like most writers, I think I am a people watcher. I do spend my days analyzing everything around me. It's not very healthy to live like this, I suppose.
No, it's, well, what other way is there to live? If not to notice. Do you think, you know, you talked about being a teacher of writing. Can writing really be taught? I mean, can anybody be taught to be a writer?
So that's a good question. I thought a lot about it over the years because I also studied.
You're a very good teacher.
Thank you so much. So kind. I paid Gil. No, I'm joking. I'm joking. No, that's another thing about being an outsider. You develop this dark sense of humor to cope.
So really, I mean,
yeah. So back to the question of teaching, which I'm very interested in, because I also studied creative writing, and I had a serious writer's block went for 4 years, and that happened when I was studying doing my master's of creative writing. So the short answer to this complex question is I don't think you can ever teach talent. There's a lot of democratic sort of discourses going on in the literary world where people say things like, everybody can write, everybody has a story. It's true that everybody has a story, but as Robert Desai, who you know well, Ramona, once wrote, every taxi driver I get into a taxi with has a better story than me to tell, but I have the voice to tell it in. So I don't think you can teach the voice. I don't think you can teach, if you're not talented, you're just not talented. But what you can do as a teacher is just create shortcuts for writers. Help them to get quicker to where they need to get. I know this because I used to write in such tortured way. Because I used to have this fixed idea that there's only one way to write and I have to follow it. And so, for example, I used to think that when I was a young writer, you can only write a novel if you write it chapter by chapter by chapter by chapter. And some writers really write like this, and it's good for them and natural for them, but it's completely unnatural for me. And so I killed a few novels like that. You were talking about murder novels before. So really, what I came to understand about teaching writing and is really what the best teacher of writing can do is to help writers to identify what is their individual writing process, because there's no process, there's processes.
Well, of course, your most recent book, The Writer Laid Bare, which is this one with the pink, writing has been sort of hailed by many people as very inspiring and honest and raw in its wisdom about, you know, the struggle to be a writer, and being vulnerable as a writer and accepting vulnerability. And I wondered how hard it is to take your own advice about what to write and how to write. I mean, I think, did you tell me once that working as a social worker with people who have mental illnesses was easier for you than writing?
Anything really. There's a quote by somebody, I can't remember which writer, but he said something like, I've been a bricklayer, I've been a truck driver, and writing is so much harder. Yes, it's really, I'm one of those people who definitely doesn't necessarily follow what she preaches. I mean, I try to, but it is very hard. I hate rules. I've been brought up, as you know, in a dissident household. I'm very rebellious, but I do have 4 writing rules for myself which work, and 2 of them is about that. It's about write what makes you blush, or write about what makes you uncomfortable, because I think that's where the most interesting stuff is. And the other one is write only about what is urgent to you. And again, what is urgent to us is usually what makes us most uncomfortable. So I just have to remind myself these things when I write, when I get really scared, which I do.
Well, you wrote The Dangerous Bride, which is a very full of blushing and full of things that make you uncomfortable, full of, you know, it's about polyamory. Oh, yeah, absolutely, you know. She writes about this sort of moment in her life between marriages and, you know, investigating people who have multiple sexual partners and multiple romantic partners, and she goes to sex parties and she goes to trying desperately to interview people who have very unusual arrangements, and she's writing it all down. And, you know, I'm surprised that you say sort of things that make you blush or things that you're shy about, because you put yourself in these situations which are, you know, very kind of, I suppose, threatening in a way. I mean, how do you explain that impulse?
I think it all comes down to this internal conflict I was mentioning before, between always wanting to experience risk and to live adventurously, but also always wanting the security and safety. And that's why non-monogamy has always appealed to me, because in non-monogamy you can have a secure relationship. Theoretically, in reality, it doesn't work exactly like that. The Dangerous Bride is actually a story of my first 2 non-monogamous marriages in which I failed gloriously. So, and I'm exploring how and why I failed. And so it's this one to have a secure relationship, but also to be able to free to go and explore. And it's interesting because I went, and as you say, in this book, it's not just my story. I interviewed a lot of people who practice non-monogamy in Australia. And when I wrote that book, that was way before polyamory became a commonplace word. Polyamory, by the way, is only one variety of non-monogamy. There's many others. But at the time, it was really hard to find people who would talk to me, and not like now. And one of the reasons why I wanted to talk to these people, it was not just for research, but also for very personal reasons, because I was trying at the time to save my second marriage. And I was trying to learn from people how to do non-monogamy ethically without hurting each other. And I learned so many interesting things, so much wisdom, which I completely did not implement and failed again. So,
but
theory is good, but practice is a different matter.
So now I wanted to talk to you about being an Israeli Jewish Australian writer now, because you've I've read an essay which will be published, I think, next month of yours, about the difference between being a Jewish Australian writer and being an Israeli Jewish Australian writer, and what is available to write about and what can't be written about, or what you find difficult to publish. Or tell me the difference. Tell me what you've noticed about the difference between that Israeli strand.
Look, you know how since October 7, and this is not just writers, I mean, I think almost every Jewish artist I know has been devastated by how the arts have not supported us, how we've been often bullied and doxxed, and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And I know that for a lot of the Jewish writers in Australia, this came as a complete shock. That I'm just saying this, I haven't done any research or study, but I'm just saying it based on my conversations with a lot of people, and especially with, I've been running this WhatsApp group, the notorious WhatsApp group. So I have had a lot of conversations with people, and I don't want to sound like Cassandra, that prophetess from the Greek mythology who kept saying, don't let the Trojan horse in, don't let the Trojan horse in, nobody listened to her. But I have been talking for many years now, and I think those of you here who know me, have known me for years, would testify to this. I've been talking about this for years now, how deeply, deeply anti-Semitic the art world has been in Australia in so many ways. And I think it's because, and this is where I'm coming to your question, Ramona, and a lot of this anti-Semitism, it's not conscious, it's a lot of really good people, but the impulse, it's just in their viscera. So being an Israeli author, and really, there are some other Israeli authors in Australia, and I know there's one here in the room. But as I was saying, as Ramona was saying, in terms of public profile, being in events and festivals, I'm always the only Israeli person in the room. Often I'm also the only Jewish person in the room, in festivals, in events, and things like this. And so being an Israeli the only Israeli for many, many years now, I think I just developed a more sensitive barometer because I've been on the receiving end of so many, what we call these days, I don't like this word, it's a bit precious to me, but microaggressions.
Like what?
Like, for example, and that was, for example, I was introduced, I won't name names, but I was introduced quite a few years ago. I'm talking maybe, was when my first child was really small. So it would be like 10 years ago, I was introduced to a very famous Australian author who is internationally famous and so travels a lot around the world. And he really liked me, I think, and I liked him. But one of the first things is, he had this impulse, one of the first things to say to me, just literally in the first 10 minutes that I met him, I'll never go to Israel until it ends its occupation. I said, oh, okay, interesting. And where have you been? Where have you traveled? And so he gave me this whole list of countries, which very questionable regimes. And one of those regimes was, one of those countries he'd been to was Russia. And he even went there when it was still Soviet Union. And look, I must say that person actually since been changed his views, we're still talking. But the point of this story is those double standards. I've been living with them for as many years as I'm in Australia, which is 25 years. Well, maybe less because I haven't been on a circuit of festivals and things that long, but at least 15 years. And I think when you're Jewish, Australian, if you don't write about Jewish themes, and if you don't openly declare yourself as a Jewish person, and maybe if you don't have a big nose like I do, you can what we call pass if you choose to. I can't pass. And I'm not saying this with jealousy. I'm just stating the facts, how my situation has been different so far. I open my mouth and that's it. It's there. It's out there. So I think it's quite different because also for me, I am always viewed as the Israeli writer. And so what I find that people do with me in the literary world a lot is they do what this author that I mentioned before did. They have this cognitive dissonance because I know a lot of people in the literary world. I have a lot of friends in the literary world. I've mentored and taught a lot of writers in Australia. And so people get this cognitive dissonance because they have a lot of the writers I know who are good people in many ways, but they have this real instant aversion and lack of knowledge about Israel, about the complexity of the country. So they have the cognitive dissonance. They really have this visceral reaction to the country I come from, but they don't have this visceral reaction against me. And so what happens to me a lot in public is that people do what that international author did. They forget gulags. They forget Stalin. They forget Putin. They absolutely focus on me, my Russian part, and they celebrate it. and they just, and they encourage me and support me because I'm this lovely, beautiful, nice Russian writer. So a quick example of this would be one of the ABC radio interviews I did, and I'm just giving it as an example. It didn't happen just in that interview, but it's just something that stuck in my head. Had a great conversation with the presenter. It was quite a long airtime as well. And this presenter, I won't say he or she, they, just kept referring to very instead like Ramona in my change of languages, and they just kept asking me, so how did you actually manage from Russian to transition to English? And I kept saying, but I never did that. I never even wrote books in Russian. I actually wrote 3 books in Hebrew, so I transitioned from Hebrew to English, which was a different type of challenge. But how did you manage from Russian to go into English to write? It's really interesting. So it's like people get this sort of blind spot when they talk to me. So although I was devastated by what happened in the arts since October 7, and in fact since 2021, when there was that other conflict in Gaza, I just feel, I've always felt it coming, and that really affects my practice because I feel like I can't. I'm the kind of writer who, like the Rachel, the very famous poetess from Israel, wrote in one of her poems, only about myself I can tell. And I told a lot of stories about my Russian, past, but I also want to write about Israel. And I just encountered this really very difficult situation professionally because my relationship to Israel is not uncritical at all. I mean, I love Israel and I have a lot of issues with Israel. I feel about Israel more or less like I feel about my parents. So I want to explore this in my work, but I feel that because of how awful it's been, the discourse around Israel, I feel like almost like I can't say anything negative because I'll be just sort of jumping on a bandwagon and piling on top of everybody else who say things which are completely not true about the country. But I also can't, so I feel like I can't write about this critically, but I also can't write about this uncritically because it's not true, but also because who will publish me? I mean, at the moment in the world of literature, there's quite a few literary magazines, for example, who have it as their explicit policy. They will not publish writers who are what they call Zionist, which really what it means, as we all know here, all Zionist means, as we know, is that you believe that Israel has the right to exist. Where do you take it politically? Do you support the settlements or do you support two-state solution? It doesn't matter. If you believe that Israel has the right to exist, you're not going to be published by these particular journals. And I suspect increasingly it will become like this also with publishers. So it will be such a doomsayer. So I feel like there's professionally, I just kind of hit, as an Israeli writer, I just hit that sort of space where, well, what do I do? How do I find my audience? But on the other hand, this is what I want to write about. We talked about being vulnerable, writing about what's urgent to you. There's nothing else that is urgent to me to explore today than what it means to be a Jew in a contemporary world. Nothing else I want to write about. I used to write about feminism, I used to write about body, I used to write about sex, all that sort of stuff. I'm still interested in this, but I do not want to touch those topics now because that's all I see in front of my eyes. That's just my life at the moment.
Mm. And you can find everything you want to know about writing in this book, The Writer Laid Bare. Really, if anyone wants to be a writer or is a writer or is having difficulty with where they're at, I can highly recommend this book, The Writer Laid Bare. And Lee is going to sit over there very shortly and sign some books if you'd like to buy her books. And I think you should, because we need to support each other now more than ever.
I just want to say
Yes, please.
25.